Hello and welcome back to the Fruit of Grisaia, Yumiko's route. In the last episode, Yuuji was hired by Sakaki Yumiko as her personal bodyguard after he had told her that he had been told to step down from Ichigaya's position. We now continue as the thugs that her father sent clearly did not expect her to still have a bodyguard. Let's continue. Do you have anything to say for yourself? We have absolutely nothing to be ashamed of, sir. Don't play games with me. I told you to get that thug Kasami so-and-so out of the picture. Why is he still hanging around Yumiko? What's worse, the man's actively interfering with my plan. You call that absolutely nothing? Have you no shame whatsoever? I formally informed Kasami Yuuji of his removal from this operation, and considering the strict regulation of our organization and the character of the individual involved, I don't believe he would disobey those orders. Then tell me how exactly to explain the current situation. This is only speculation on my part, but after I relieved Kasami Yuuji from his role, I think he may inform Sakaki Yumiko of that decision. The most plausible scenario is that the news left Yumiko-san herself uneasy, leading her to recruit Kasami Yuuji as a bodyguard in a private capacity. Even if that were the case, anyone with a shred of common sense would refuse. That's only common sense from your perspective, President Sakaki. I didn't inquire about his own thoughts on the matter the other day, so it's quite possible he interpreted the situation differently. Do you really think that child's self-centered logic is going to satisfy me? Child or adult, we consider our orders absolute, and our promises. That's enough. Leave. Certainly. Please excuse me. About the matter with my daughter. Each guy is definitely acting strangely. What would you like me to do, sir? Gather some genuinely competent people. I want this taken care of, even if we have to get a little rough. Certainly. May I interpret that as an authorization for potential lethal force against those who interfere? Yes, if it comes to that, so be it. Do what has to be done. Understood, sir. It will take some time to make the arrangement. Give this your highest priority. You can temporarily discontinue the attacks until your preparations are complete. Yes, I'll begin at once. It would have been wiser to do as you were told, Yumiko. It had been several days since I came into Sakaki's employ. Strangely enough, they've been largely peaceful. That confused encounter immediately after she hired me was the last time those people tried anything. That doesn't mean they've given up, of course. More likely they've withdrawn for the moment to prepare a more decisive move. I can afford to be a little less vigilant, but I'm careful not to let my guard down entirely. Come to think of it, why are you always wearing the school uniform? Huh? We're on vacation, so normally you'd wear casual clothes every once in a while. I was just wondering if there was some reason you don't. Well, I don't think there's any reason to constantly loiter around town in casual clothes. That's not how a well-behaved student conduct themselves. Then I guess everyone else in our school is a juvenile delinquent in the making, eh? The others are free to do as they please. This is just what they taught me in my previous school, so I'm sticking with it. I don't intend to push it onto anyone else. I see. Sakaki's grown calm enough to humor me with pointless small talk of this sort. She seems much less tense after several days without violent interruption, probably because there's no need for constant wariness. The movement of her pencil appears to have grown smoother as well. All of a sudden her hand stops moving. With a brief exhalation of breath, she glances over at me out of the corner of her eye. What's wrong? You notice something? Turning her face away at my words, Sakaki curls her body forward over her sketchbook. Thank you. Her voice is almost small enough to be lost in the wind, but I hear clearly enough. What was that? I'm able to relax and focus on my art because I know you're guarding me. Sakaki? No more than that. It's because you're there. Well, not quite, but... This is suspicious. Huh? Is something wrong? Well, I mean, a thank you like this from Sakaki of all people? Don't tell me. Is that why nothing been happening in the last few days? What? I see. It all fits. Sakagi's already been kidnapped and the person sitting in front of me is an imposter. A classic trick, but you just gave yourself away. What have you done with Sakagi? If you're not planning to talk, I'm prepared to. I'm right here, thank you very much. Stop being such an utter idiot. Sakagi, is that you after all? And now you decide it's me? You have a true talent for insulting people. What do you mean by that? I'm only considering every possible scenario so I can respond to minor abnormalities before... Forget about it. Thanks so much for your work. What are you so angry about? She seemed to be in an unusual good mood just a minute ago, but now she's in full sulk mode. For all the severe lectures I've received from JB and the others regarding treatment of women, it seems I still have a great deal of room for improvement when it comes to interactions with females of my own age group. Sighing ruefully, I closed my eyes for a moment. Honestly, if only the sky would give me a little advance warning, I wouldn't get struck by lightning at such random moments. A plop of water against my forehead brings me back to reality. I raise my head and look up at the sky. Seriously? At some point, it's filled up with angry grey rain clouds. I noticed it was looking a little overcast, but I hadn't expected such a sudden and dramatic turn for the worse. For a moment, I considered attributing the abrupt storm to Sakagi's out-of-character remarks, disturbing the balance of the universe, but I have a feeling she wouldn't appreciate the gag. Oh no, we got to hurry back. Sakagi immediately begins to push her art supplies back into her tote bag. But the rain, indifferent to her concerns, rapidly intensifies. At this rate, we're going to be soaked to the bone by the time we get back. With the slightly archaic expression that reveals her for the avid reader she is, Sakagi accurately forecast an unfortunate future. Yes, there's nothing for it. Let's wait this out over there. I point at the bridge that stands comparatively nearby. It was just part of the scenery up until now, but at the moment it's the best option for shelter from the rain. That railway bridge? Yeah, come on. I think it'd be best to run. Leading Sakagi along the river, I hurry to the bridge as the rain grows steadily stronger. She follows close behind, her bag protectively clutched to her chest. Having sprinted all out for 200 meters or so, Sakagi's completely out of breath by the time we reach her shelter. You alright? Get your breathing back to normal, take a seat and rest for a while. Yes. The area under the bridge quickly falls into shadow. Even the faint light trickling through the cracks in the storm clouds can't reach us through the heavy iron above. Fortunately, since we're more or less in the country, there isn't much junk littering the area compared to what you'd find in a city. Sometimes an empty bottle or can rolls by on the river, but that's about it. Sakagi and I brush off a light layer of dirt from the bare concrete foundation of the bridge, then settle ourselves down to wait out the storm. As the girl at my side tries her best to wipe the water from her hair with a handkerchief, I examine the state of affairs outside. The streaks of rain have only grown larger and more frequent. There's no sign of it stopping anytime soon. The sky, slightly grey and cloudy only minutes ago, is already a sea of uninterrupted black. In a country town like this, they don't even light the streets properly. The area has already grown dark, as if to exacerbate our unease. And finally, there's that familiar roar, a sound that always seemed to accompany summer downpours. Thunder can be a frightening thing. I had colleagues with experience on mountain rescue operations who'd cower nervously every time a storm rolled by. Judging from the sound, it's relatively close. Probably best not to move around too much at the moment. Guess we'll have to kill some time here, Sakagi. Turning to my side, I try to make eye contact. She doesn't meet my gaze. Her throat moves, I can hear a faint gulp. Come to think of it, this girl had an unexpectedly fearful side. Should probably reassure her that it can't strike us here. But just as I'm opening my mouth to speak... Yeah! Ooh. That's good for a thumbnail. So, hold on a minute while I do this and print screen. Where's that button? There it is. Right. Alright, back to the story. Sakagi Yumiko doesn't let other people touch her, and it's completely unthinkable that she touched them herself. When rain falls on her head, she brushes it off. When wind blows in her face, she forces her way stubbornly through it. That's the person I thought she was. And that's why this doesn't quite feel real to me. Especially after those strangely sweet words of thanks from before. It feels like I've stepped into some oddly realistic dream. I see. Seems you are really quite the scaredy cat, Sakagi. I understood quickly enough. It'd be easiest to pretend that was the reason. But the fact of the matter is, it's hard to blame this on her naturally fearful side. Something else seems to have taken hold of the young woman trembling in my arms. Something powerful and difficult to understand. Sakagi? It's still fairly warm out, but her clothes are wet with rain. Only natural that her body temperature would fall. I try to convince myself that's the only reason Sakagi is trembling, but it doesn't quite work. I'm sorry. I can't handle this. She finally speaks, wringing the words out of her throat. Her voice is frail and utterly weak in a way I would never have thought possible from the Sakagi I know. With that, the last of my strange explanations crumble. This is something new entirely, a side of her I've never seen before. I'm scared. I'm scared. I'm scared. Sakagi's cowering in terror. Even menaced by thugs on a daily basis, even when she couldn't completely hide her fear, she went about her business as usual. But that stubborn, prideful, resolute person seems to have melted away. All that's left is a frightened, trembling little girl, clinging to me like a life preserver. A diesel locomotive passes overhead with a loud, sustained roar. The water that had gathered on top of the bridge rained down on either side. The very air around us seems to shake. But Sakagi doesn't react. She lies on top of my body, completely motionless except for her trembling, and waits for the thunder to pass. I'm sorry about that. Not a problem. I can't bring myself to ask her anything. There was obviously something behind Sakagi's behavior, but it was such a strong reaction that it feels wrong to ask out of mere curiosity. The rain slaps heavily on the bridge above, the wind whistles loudly by outside, sometimes driving water into us from the side. But now that the thunder has passed, Sakagi seemed to be gradually regaining her calm. I just can't handle thunder. Cuddling close, Sakagi stares up into my eyes. Why are you so strong? I might look strong to you, but I've never thought of myself that way. You're strong. Strong enough to live on your own like this. You don't spend all your time building walls against the outside world while everything inside crumbles to pieces. You're not like me. On my own, huh? I'm sorry to ask this sort of thing of you, but... What is it? Go ahead. There's something I want you to hear. Would that be alright? I told you before, didn't I? If you want to talk, I'm willing to listen. Sakagi nods, and in that same small, soft tone, she begins to tell me about herself. The rain shows no sign of letting up. Her quiet voice flows past me and dissolves into the deepening darkness. The weakness of those words seems to echo with the fragility of the girl in my arms. The summer sun scorched the ground beneath our feet. In the heart of the ancient capital, we walked uphill, following the road away from the station's eastern exit. I was talking casually of trivial things. You know what, Mommy? Yesterday I saw a doggy outside the window. Looking up at the person holding my hand, I smiled. That's nice. In contrast to my cheerful chattering, the woman walking at my side had a clouded expression on her face. Her profile was beautiful but cold, almost like that of a marble statue. And he looked over me, so I waved my hand, and then the doggy turned toward me. That's nice. The same words, repeated in the same tone, as if she was playing back a recording. Not understanding what that signified, I continued to speak. I think he could tell I was there, and guess what? After that That trivial little event must have made me very happy, because I just kept on talking. Sentence flowed into sentence with barely a pause for a breath in between. Matching the rhythm of my skipping steps, I pattered on faster and faster, filled with innocent excitement. Yumiko, dear. First her feet came to a stop. Without turning to look at me, her face still in profile, my mother finally answered. I'm sorry, do you think you could be quiet for a while? Her quiet voice emerged only to melt away into the squawking of the cicadas. Two pleasures, the skipping and the conversation, abruptly taken from me. I hesitated uncertainly, not sure where to direct my gaze. but soon I found a clear path forward, and my hesitation gave way to a reply. I'm sorry, Mommy. It was the phrase, I'm sorry. How many times had I spoken those words by then? Even when I'd done nothing wrong, even when I'd done nothing at all, those words offered an exit from any uncomfortable moment, and above all else, they lightened the burden of my mother's heart. Mumbling those words had always been the best that I could do at times like those. That's all right. Sorry, Yumiko. And my mother, in turn, offered me the same soft voice of apology. In retrospect, it might well have been her fault that I developed a habit of relying on the words I'm sorry. She spoke the phrase so frequently it was probably only natural that I'd begun to imitate her. Let's be on our way. A cold profile, a rigid face, locked in position, never turning to me. Speaking a few words with nothing but a slight movement of her lips, my mother began to walk once more, her strides even smaller than usual. Okay. With a nod, I stepped forward at my mother's side, slipping halfway under the shadow cast by her parasol. As the shade swayed with her steps, the blazing sun flickered before my eyes like a movie shot on a cheap film. We walked in silence through the midsummer heat, surrounded by the voices of the cicadas. I squeezed my mother's hands tightly, very tightly, as if that connection was the only thing in the world I could rely on. My mother, Misako, was born into the Kawamoto family, owners of a real estate business in the ancient city of Kamakura. After graduating from university, she accepted an arranged marriage to my father, Sakagi Michiaki. She was 25 years old. The Kawamoto were small-time landowners, and their business had fallen into financial problems. When their only daughter married the young president of the East Beach Railways, a company that had taken complete control of the regional railroad network, the Kawamoto family treated it as a miracle comparable to winning the lottery. Welcome home. Right. Dear, about dinner. I already ate. Honestly, why do you always feel the need to ask? What about my change of clothes? Yes, I have it prepared. Then bring it down immediately. I'll be leaving in 30 minutes to take the clothes to Kojima at the entrance. Yes. Daddy? My father was a complete workaholic with more than one house to return to. He only came to see us once a week and never stayed longer than an hour. At that point, I hadn't so much as held a conversation with him. All I could remember were brief moments of eye contact in the hallway when we passed each other by. I can still remember the way he looked at me. There was no emotion in his gaze, not even contempt, almost as if he didn't realize something was there. His eyes were frighteningly empty. My room in that house was pointlessly large. Spacious as it was, it hadn't been made for a child to live in. The bed and closet were both adult-sized. For most part, it looked like nothing more than just another guest room. A child's desk haphazardly purchased assortment of stuffed animals and toys. These were the only objects that suggested otherwise, and they felt deeply out of place. I wonder, what kind of greeting would make Daddy talk to me? I stood in front of my mirror, practicing many different facial expressions, earnestly thinking over a problem with no solution. What kind of smile would make him come home more? Alone in a room far too large for me, I thought about the stone-faced father I barely knew. How could I catch his attention? How could I make him realize I was even there? Good morning, good morning, good morning. Am I doing it wrong? I can't really tell. Good morning, good morning, good morning. Within that staid and conservative railroad family, a daughter bore little weight. My mother's marriage had seemed a blessing for the Kawamoto family, but when she gave birth to me, it quickly became an uncomfortable topic. Her job had been to give birth to an heir to inherit the East Beach Empire. Instead, she had produced a daughter. At best, a potential tool for political marriage. No one was to blame for that, but it was still a deep disappointment to those around her. My father had treated his new wife very kindly at first, but after I came into the world and he learned that my mother was too physically frail to endure many pregnancies, he became noticeably brusque and distant. That transformation must have hurt my mother deeply. After it began, she grew gradually weaker in body and spirit until she could no longer manage to take care of father's personal needs. My mother returned to her parents when I was 6 years old. She had endured as best she could, desperate not to leave a bad impression on my father's family, but my mother was fundamentally a sheltered and fragile woman. Putting aside her physical condition, her mind had been worn down to the point where she could simply no longer cope. And so, one hot midsummer day, she gathered her luggage, took my hand, and left the Sakagi house. I have returned. Yeah, welcome home. Welcome back. It wasn't a joyous homecoming for anyone involved. After an exchange of indescribably uncomfortable greetings, they began an equally awkward conversation. How are you feeling, Mizuko? I'm alright, it's nothing serious. Then let's make sure you recover quickly, dear, for Miyagi-san's sake as well as yours. Yes. It was obvious at a glance that my mother couldn't possibly go back any time soon. Still, my pragmatic grandparents wanted their daughter back with the Sakagi family before the wound of separation grew too deep. My mother may have wanted to return herself, even knowing that she was no longer capable of enduring that life. There was a slight edge of frustration in her voice as she vaguely affirmed my grandparents' words. Mommy? They left me out of the conversation so completely that I began to feel invisible. In the end, I couldn't help but to call out. When I spoke, my mother's hand twitched around mine, as if only just realizing that she'd been pulling me along at her side. As if she'd been trying to forget an unpleasant reality by averting her eyes from it. Yumiko, say hello to your grandma and grandpa. Still not looking in my direction, my mother muttered these words quietly. Hello, Grandpa. Hello, Grandma. I tried out the greeting I had practiced for Dad on my grandparents. Ah, yes. Hello there. Hello. Their responses were stiff and awkward. They didn't so much as smile at me. It had already been decided that my mother would be hospitalized. Originally, the doctors had recommended admitting her to a psychiatric ward, but her return home under the cloud of our separation would no doubt become the subject of gossip in the area. Who knew what people would say about a mental illness on top of it all? Instead, Mom returned home under the superficial cover of poor health and entered a general hospital. My grandparents had been busy enough with their struggling business. Now they had their new burdens on their hands, and they made no attempt to hide their exhaustion. Their complaining began on the very first day. Poor thing, if Misako hadn't given birth to a girl, this would never... Don't talk like that. Come now, you said it yourself, dear. We had a wonderful opportunity here, but now it's gone to waste. Well, maybe I did, but... This is exactly why you should have tried again the moment they knew it was a girl, even if it meant shouting down those doctors. You know as well as I do that Misagi's not strong enough for that now. But during the years I spent living with my mother's family, my grandparents never showed me anything like affection. In retrospect, I was an unwanted burden, a symbol of failure. I suppose they hardly had any reason to welcome me, but even so, it was a form of cruelty. Misako's still hospitalized, and now we have to send Yumiko to school as well. Just what are we supposed to do? The Sakagi family is paying for her living expenses, aren't they? That's fine. It's certainly not fine. The company's been hanging on by its fingernails for months, if you hadn't noticed. How can you be so easygoing about this? Do you have to put it like that? The two of them seemed to quarrel virtually every minute of every day right until I left the house. They were considerate enough not to behave this way around my mother, but their unwanted grandchild was a different story. Raw emotions flew back and forth as if I wasn't even there. That dog was really cute. When I was inside the house, I couldn't help hearing unpleasant conversations. It was a small mercy that we had one of the spacious gardens so typical in country towns. I'd always slip out there when I saw my grandparents talking with serious expressions on their faces. I passed the time by scratching on the ground with tree branches. Those scribbles in the dirt became an escape, a portal to a vague, faraway world. I wonder when we can go home again. Recalling what I'd seen through the window that day, I moved the point of my tree branch through the soil. Recalling my few happy memories, I drew them out one by one, over and over, hoping to make them even slightly more vivid in my mind. My drawing improved quickly in pursuit of a clear, unmistakable exit from reality. I carefully combed my shoulder-length hair and tied it back with a rubber band. I hadn't particularly been trying to grow it out, but once I understood that haircuts cost money, I simply allowed things to take their own course. Not to imply that my grandparents were keeping me in rags. They were far too vain for that. I've always had the minimum necessity to look respectable. But ever since I'd grown old enough to understand my position, it was difficult to muster the slightest interest in fashion. I opted for plain, dark clothes, or the more inconspicuous the better. My hair fell straight to the shoulder in the simplest possible style. As a child, I wanted nothing more than to be noticed, but at some point, I'd begun to seek refuge in my own anonymity. It seemed safer to be ignored. I'm off. Pausing under the withered eaves, I offered a farewell to no one in particular, then walked off alone. I'd grown tall. I was wearing a middle school uniform now. Nobody had commented on either fact. Ever since arriving at that place, I had been alone. There were always people in the house, but I was alone. Hello there, Miss Yumiko. Here's your lunch for today. Thank you, Toshi-san. As I left the house, I found Toshi-san waiting outside. Toshi-san was an old woman who had looked after my grandparents' family for many years as a housekeeper. Even when the business fell on hard times and could no longer afford the expense, she stayed in the house next door, taking care of us without any compensation. I wasn't her employer, but she always called me Miss in a kindly tone of voice. She was the only person in my life to show me real affection. Wearing a uniform's still kind of embarrassing. What are you saying? It looks wonderful in you, Miss. Thank you, Toshi-chan. You're the only one who tells me that sort of thing. Miss. Thank you again. I'd better get going. I didn't talk with anyone at my middle school, or rather I couldn't. It was an insular place where relationships had long since been firmly established, often mirroring the connections between parents. Someone abruptly wedged in from the outside had very little hope of fitting in. Much less for a quiet girl who had moved out to the country under circumstances like mine. None of the other children were friendly to me. I knew they talked to me behind my back. But after the years I'd spent alone with my grandparents, I suppose I'd grown used to such casual disdain. My student life didn't feel particularly painful. It was merely empty. I filled the vast stretches of empty time by drawing pictures. It was a habit I'd picked up as a means of escaping into fantasy, but as I came to accept reality, the images changed gradually into simple landscapes. Not to say that I was viewing things more positively now. I'd simply grown numb. The contents of my drawings mattered less to me than the time I could kill moving pencil over paper. I no longer looked for meaning in the art itself. My grandfather had a pile of empty sketchbooks abandoned from the days when he had time to pursue his hobbies. I made a rare request and took them as my own. Day in and day out, I filled their pages with dull landscapes. With mechanical movements, I drew hollow images of a hollow world. When school ended, I would make my way over to the hospital where my mother was staying. The hospital was further from my grandparents' house than my middle school. To reach it, I had to walk a good 2 kilometers, first descending a slope, then climbing back up. I didn't have a bicycle, and asking for bus fare would have been unpleasant, so I always traveled that road on foot. Of course, it wasn't pleasant, but I developed an obstinate streak in my own right. That hike had become part of my daily routine. Ah, hello, Sakaki-san. A familiar nurse called out to me as I walked down in a familiar hallway. Good afternoon. Your mother seemed to be feeling better today. She even cleaned her plate at lunch for once. That's nice to hear. I'm sure it's because you're coming to see her every day, dear. It's very sweet of you. Well, I don't know. Equivocating with a weak smile, I nodded to the nurse and walked away. My mother's condition was always seesawing from improvement to setback. It wasn't the sort of disease that could be cured with some wonder drug, and in Mother's case, the doctors didn't entirely understand the causes of her illness or even the reasons she wasn't healing. There was no clear path to a complete recovery. By that point, I understood that my existence had a great deal to do with her sickness. My visits couldn't possibly have been helping her. It was probably just the opposite. I walked rapidly toward room 301 in the A ward. There was a part of me that thought those visits were pointless, but without them I would have lost the only thing I had left, my origins. Even as I isolated myself behind inconspicuous appearance, in that one place I desperately sought some kind of connection. Mom? My mother had been given a private room. The hospital's administrator was an old acquaintance of my grandfather, so it had been arranged at a considerable discount. Or so our gossipy neighbors believed. It was a pure white room, largely empty except for the plain medical bed standing by the window. My mother passed her days lying there. There was no medical reason she couldn't go out, but she never tried. Ah, hello, Yumiko. You came to see me again? My mother greeted me with the most convincing smile she could force onto her face, but that face didn't turn toward me. The nurse told me you were feeling better today. Setting up a folding chair at her bedside, I began to speak. Her physician had asked me to fill the visits with conversation. Even the silliest little thing will do, just keep talking to her, please. She said you got your appetite back too. That's a relief. but I filled every moment with silly chat for a different reason entirely. I see. So today The conversation was almost entirely one-sided. My mother's responses were mostly monosyllabic. It was difficult to tell if she was even listening. Even so, I continued to chatter away. Nice weather again, isn't it? Eventually, I ran out of things to talk about and changed the topic to the weather out of desperation. But by then, even the monosyllabic responses had trickled to a halt. Time flowed by in silence. 1 minute of stillness. 3, 5. Finally, my mother slowly opened her mouth to speak. Even before the words came, my body twitched in alarm. I'm sorry. I really am for being such a useless mother. That's not... When my mother spoke to me, it was always to deliver an apology. That was why I babbled away so persistently. I didn't want to give her the chance to speak. I've got to be getting back now, okay? I see. Folding the chair with a few practiced movements, I leaned it against a small shelf on the way. Bye, Mom. I'll see you tomorrow. I came to this place in search of a connection, and every day I went home with nothing but disappointment. To be honest, those visits were painful for me. Sometimes I thought about how much nicer it would be just to stop coming entirely. But without my faint connection to my mother, I would be adrift in a sea of nothingness. I had no choice but to hold stubbornly to that single lifeline. I wasn't under any illusions that my conversations with Mom were doing her any good. In fact, her physician had begun to indirectly allude otherwise. Something along the lines of, "You don't have to come every single day, dear." But I was afraid. What if my mother did recover? If I abandoned her now, she might not take me with me when she returned to her old home. I didn't have many pleasant memories of that place, but at least there I was something other than an object of scorn. At least there I had something like an identity. And I couldn't return unless my mother took me with her. I hated myself for those selfish thoughts, but I didn't stop visiting. Pushing everything that had brought us there out of my mind, I clung stubbornly to the childish hope of a happy ending waiting around the next corner. The first year of my middle school life flowed by aimlessly. The only thing I had gained in that time was a bit of textbook knowledge. Apart from that, I hadn't learned a thing. I'm fairly sure my grades were good. I didn't want to give anyone the chance to criticize me on that front. Becoming a difficult child would be too risky, and my place in the world was tedious enough as it was. Thinking back on it now, I might have been happier just running away, but having spent my entire life shut up inside a box, the idea of trying to escape didn't even occur to me. I'm off. Just as 1 year ago I said goodbye to no one in particular and left the house alone. Nothing had changed. The scenery was the same. My life was the same. Everything in that country town was static. Please don't resent the master and missus. They were originally very kind people, you know. That morning when Toshi-san handed me my lunchbox, I found myself grumbling a few rare complaints about my situation. The targets were mainly my grandparents. We'd been living together for many years now, and still they only spoke to me when it was absolutely necessary. Every moment I spent in that house made me feel as if I was slowly suffocating. But Grandpa and Grandma act like I'm not even there. When you become poor, the heart grows impoverished as well. They are too tense and busy to give you the attention you deserve, dear. Once the business recovers, I'm sure that will change. I'm not so sure about that. You're a very sweet girl, Miss Yumiko. I'm sure they'll realize that someday. Until then, please try to make do with your decrepit old neighbor. Make do? That's not funny, Toshi-san. You're always looking after me. Miss Yumiko. Nothing about our household had changed in years. As always, our lifestyle was dependent on Toshi-san's quiet assistant. She took care of us all without even a single complaint. But I hadn't seen my grandparents show her gratitude for everything she did. Not even once. Toshi-san's son, who lived with his wife in the neighborhood, clearly wanted to pry his mother away from her unrewarded servitude to the Kawamoto family. I'd overheard them having a heated fight on the topic. Our life was the same as it had always been, but beneath the surface it was slowly coming apart at the seams. I wonder if Toshi-san's going to stop coming over. One day I was making my way along the sloping road I had once walked with my mother, bombarded by the cries of the cicadas. The area around my grandparents' home was a district with strict regulations on the height and variety of buildings, so the scenery hadn't changed much in the years since my mother's entered hospital. It was picturesque in a way that seemed to appeal to rich people. Many city dwellers had their second houses nearby, but I could never come to enjoy the scenery. It left me cold. The things that mattered to me changed for the worse, but the things I hated, the things that left me cold, never seemed to go away. Driven by frustrating, indistinct feelings of powerlessness, I began to walk faster. But with a flinch of surprise, my legs suddenly came to a halt. Hey there. Morning, Yumiko-chan. On your way to school? No need to stop walking. Just wondering if you'd mind having a little chat. After that moment of hesitation, my legs began to move once more, faster than before. Striding along, almost like a racewalker, I hurried down the road leading to my school. Seems like your dad's been getting up to a few things lately. There's been a bit of promotion, actually. Yumiko-chan, do you know anybody by the name of Ninomiya-san? She's a woman just about your mother's age. Remember anything about her? Seriously, anything's fine. I'd really appreciate it. Also, this is more about your family. Back when your mom and dad were living together, do you remember having a helper by the name of Mr.? Oh, what's up, Yumiko-chan? Coming to an abrupt halt, I turned to face the man. As I've told you before, I don't have anything to say and I'm not going to answer your questions. Please stop following me around like this. Look, Yumiko-chan, I wasn't. And while you're at it, stop calling me that. I don't recall being your friend. Excuse me. Sheesh, must get that from her father. There was one significant change in my stagnant life. A reporter from a gossip magazine, whose job seems to be consist of digging for information on my father, was making a habit of loitering around me. I had first met him during the winter of my first year in junior high. At the time I was still comically naive. He approached me with kind words and sympathy, two things I wasn't used to getting, and convinced me to open up to him about my family's circumstances. Pathetic as it was, I didn't realize it was all for an article until the moment my grandmother threw the tabloid in my face and delivered a furious scolding. Humiliated and bitter, I swore to myself never to discuss personal matters with strangers, or to trust their compassion. And despite it all, the very same journalist had the nerve to show his face in front of me again. Every time something happened, he'd come around sniffing for scraps of information. Speaking with him felt like brushing against an enormous and particularly slimy leech. I masked ahead as quickly as I could, one fierce step after another, trying to shake off the lingering residue of our encounter. But then again, the place I was hurrying to wasn't exactly pleasant in its own right. So I saw Yamachi by the station, right? Around the roundabout. But when I say, hey, he just frickin' runs away. The guy never hangs out with us anymore. Guess he did really get himself a girlfriend or whatever. Huh? No way. Who's Yamachi's going out with? What? You didn't hear? You know, Kimono in Class C? It's his... It would have been much easier if they simply treated me like I didn't exist. Their clumsy method of ignoring me could sometimes become a weapon of as sharp as any insult. It was well past the point of letting each and every sudden silence weigh on my mind, but it still wasn't exactly a pleasant feeling. Look who showed up again. Her grades are pretty good, but her mom's in the hospital, right? Whenever it runs in the family. The more I tried to ignore them, the more their whispers seemed to pierce their way into my ears. A year had passed since I'd first set foot in the school. By then, there wasn't a single person in my class who didn't know all about my family. There's no such thing as privacy in the countryside. The real nature of my mother's illness, which should have been kept absolutely confidential by the hospital, had filtered all the way down to the middle school's gossips. And a purely academic question occurred to me. If this wasn't despair, then what exactly would qualify? No escape here either. I opened my sketchbook beneath my desk, making sure that nobody could see. I'd kept at my art, and flipping through the book, it was obvious that my ability to depict fine details had come a long way in the last year. But all that really proved was how obsessively I'd sought escape, how deeply detached I'd grown from the world around me. Rather than pride, I felt something like nausea. Even my art was beginning to lose its value as a refuge. The room was pure white. Nothing had changed here. Not the room, not even my mother's posture in her bed. It was as if I'd never left. Every time I walked in that door and saw her sitting there, I felt a surge of irrepressible pity run through me. Mom, I'm here. Ah, Yumiko, come in. As always, I saw my mother in profile. As always, her gaze didn't turn me. As always, she smiled quietly. But there was no tenderness in that expression. She was simply moving her face into that shape. It was an empty imitation of a real smile. I brought your books. I lowered a small bundle of books and weekly magazines my mother had requested onto the shelf beside her bed. They usually came with mail, but sometimes I happened to run into a nurse who would hand them over to me for more personal delivery. Ah, thank you. Of course, the weeklies in question were respectable, established publications that largely kept away from the scandals and rumors circulated by the tabloids. We couldn't take the risk of her reading something like that article I'd unwittingly contributed to the previous winter. It undoubtedly would have set back her treatment, which was already proceeding slowly enough as it was. Mother's newfound reading habit seemed to be part of an attempt to learn more about my father and the company he was running. Looking at that thick pile of magazines and books, I felt my chest tighten at her obvious desperation. Mom had never known much about the business. I would have been surprised if she could even understand half of what she was reading. The nurse told me you didn't quite finish your lunch today. I see. I'll have to get Toshi-san to make you a meal next time. I'm sure it'll be a lot tastier than what they serve in the hospital. I see. Our interactions followed the same familiar pattern. I chatted away relentlessly while my mother muttered vaguely. Lately, even those monosyllabic responses had grown repetitive and careless. Almost as if she was beginning to treat the world with the same careless disinterest my father had shown her. It was a particularly difficult visit. My mother barely spoke, and I ran out of things to say fairly quickly. As the hours I spent at school had grown increasingly suffocating, I was spending more and more time wandering around in search of quiet places where I could be alone. These days, I frequently find myself lagging for stories to tell. I guess I should be going home. I rose quietly from my seat. My mother's face, as always, didn't turn toward me. It had been a truly pathetic excuse for a conversation, and I had little hope tomorrow would be any better. The things I wanted to say the same fell apart. The things I wanted to change stayed exactly as they were. Time no longer seemed to be flowing. It was a stagnant, black, brackish pool, and even treading water was becoming a struggle. But as I prepared to leave, my mother spoke. That hadn't happened for quite some time. Mom? That one word came as a complete surprise. Was she about to say something? Despite it all, I found myself pausing expectantly, hoping for some positive sign. Thinking the matter over calmly, it was foolish to even imagine her mood had suddenly changed. But I was so starved for a glimmer of hope that my mind latched onto the most optimistic possible interpretation. And then, with a few simple words, my naive happy end scenario shattered like the fragile piece of glass it has always been. If only you'd been a boy. My mother had never said anything like that before. No doubt the thought had crossed her mind, but so long as she has even had the shred of rationality remaining, the words could never have passed her lips. But after all, if she were to say that, Mom, then nothing could ever change, except to fall apart. Why couldn't you have been a boy? Something slipped out of my hands and clattered to the floor. A visitor from the company had dropped off a few jelly desserts. I'd been taking it right from the shelf with a spoon. My mother had been skipping her meals lately, but I thought she might at least manage to eat that. Considering the season, a white peach jelly seemed appropriate. Maybe it would be easier for her to hold a spoon with a flat handle. Moments before, those were the only thoughts in my mind. They were gone now, obliterated by my mother's words so completely that it was as if they'd never existed at all. I ran as fast as I could, pushing my heart so hard I thought it might just sputter to a stop. Down the slope in front of the hospital, up again, onto the large curving detour, past the station, around the corner from a small cleaning store, into the remains of an abandoned factory. Only then, absolutely confident I was alone, did I finally come to a halt. Gasping for air, I doubled over and held my trembling legs with both hands, propping up a body that seemed ready to collapse. The world flickered before my oxygen-starved eyes. My peripheral vision was dim and clouded as though I was peering out from inside a tunnel. I could feel sweat pouring out from all over my body. My hair and clothes were completely disheveled. I'd fallen at some point on the way over. There were scrapes on my knees and elbow. I pushed myself erect, a tattered mess of a girl. But I couldn't have cared less about any of that. After all, the tears streaming uncontrollably down my face were far more blatantly pathetic than my beat-up clothing. What am I supposed to do about it? I could have endured it if she complained about something I could fix. I could have behaved better. There was still room for my grades to improve. I could have made myself more presentable. I could have cut my every strand of hair to the exact same length. I could have learned to walk in a refined way at an absolutely steady pace. But no matter what, I was powerless to undo the reality of my own birth. Why did she have to choose the one thing I could never ever change? My grandparents were right back then. If it was possible, she should just have tried again. She should have crushed that egg in the womb and pretended it never happened. Better than this hopelessness, this irreparably broken life. It's not like I asked to be. Placing my hands against my breast, I pushed down with all my strength. How could a thing so totally beyond my control bring me to such misery? Ow! I felt a dull, throbbing pain inside my chest. The painful pressure was accompanied by a slight twinge of stimulation. Even as I rejected it, my body reminded me that I was female. It hurts! It hurts! There was pain, but at the same time I could feel the blood throughout my body beginning to stir in an unfamiliar way. Instinctively I knew that it was something sexual, and I shivered with pure loathing. I hated my body. I hated the woman it was becoming. I hate it! I can't take this! I didn't ask for that misery. I had no say in my crime. It was born with me. But so long as I lived, the pain would always be lurking somewhere deep inside me. If only you'd been a boy. With one phrase, anyone could reduce me to nothing. I could study all I wanted. I could be the sweetest, most well-behaved person in the world. But so long as I stayed in that body, my naked vulnerability would never go away. All that for what? I threw open my bag and tore out my pencil box. Flipping open the lid, I retrieved the box cutter I used as a makeshift sharpener for my colored pencil. I wonder when exactly I began to find the act of cutting things apart pleasant. The clicking of the blade emerging from its sheath, the sound of something once whole being severed apart. Those have become calming sounds to me. How wonderful would it be if I could slice away my femininity with a single box cutter? How wonderful would it be if I could sever my fate with a touch of a blade? How wonderful would it be if only one movement of my hand could cut me free of all the troubles that had coiled around me and choked the air from my lungs? As I cut savagely through the long, identical bundles of black, such thoughts ran through my head, one after another. Oh. On the boiling concrete, speckled with the remains of faded paint, clumps of black gathered. They fell like a vile rain until the sun-heated ground was covered in them. I could feel the gloom in my heart fading as I looked down into the darkness. But in its place, that dirty blackness left a layer of filth inside me that could never ever be cleaned away. Idiot, you got it all wrong, okay? Don't give me that, you always... Hey, hold on, look at that. Huh? Whoa, what? The heck's with the hairstyle? She looks like a freaking boy. Did she cut that herself? It looks that way, but seriously, why? Maybe they ran out of money over there again. Oh, come on, I think even they can afford a freaking haircut. I'd hope so. When I showed up for school with a hairstyle more appropriate for a boy, my classmates' reactions was exactly what I had expected. They made no effort to hide their amusement. I'd gotten that far uneventfully, not giving them much to work with, so perhaps there was a bit of a recoil effect. Whatever the case, my rough bob cut became an easy target for mockery and speculation. Of course, there wasn't a single person who showed any concern for me. My grandmother was simply lost for words at first. Not that the aghast expression on her face meant she was worried about me. This will be the last time you behave in such an unbecoming manner. Do you understand me, young lady? The one and only thing she was concerned about was how poorly my actions would appear in the eyes of society. Yes, I'm sorry. Honestly, utter shameful. My grandmother, muttering about shame and humiliation, averted her eyes and disappeared inside the house. And for a very long time I sat alone in my room, utterly silent except for the voices of the cicadas. Oh my, Miss Yumiko, what on earth happened to your hair? I'm sorry. You don't have anything to apologize for, miss. You poor thing. Toshi-san was the only person who showed genuine concern for me. But it didn't make me feel any better to know I'd made the kind old woman worry. More than anything else, her sorrowful face made me regret my rashness. I'd gotten carried away by my emotions and lashed out, but nothing had changed. Nothing was going to change. For the sake of the 1 or 2 people who acknowledged my existence, I decided not to repeat my mistake. Toshi-san's death came soon thereafter. As the record-setting heat waves stretched on, the news were constantly occupied with stories of elderly people succumbing to heat stroke. And one day, our neighbor, already past her 70th year, was among them. I'm sorry, but can you please leave? Don't say that, please. At least let me offer incense. Yumiko-san, you're aware of the reason my mother collapsed, aren't you? She worked day in and day out for the Kawamoto family, without pay, without so much as a word of thanks. Do you have any thoughts on that? I think it was inexcusable. That's why... In that case, please stay out of our lives. We don't want anything to do with the Kawamoto family from now on, let alone with all the strange rumors going around back home. Sane, leave it at that. Yes, if you say so. Well then, goodbye. I wanted to at least say thank you. Your world is supposed to grow larger as you grow up. Mine seemed to be only shrinking even smaller. I'd lost Toshi-san, and with her the small place of refuge in front of our door vanished as well. Just as I was on the verge of giving up, finally at long last a small ray of light broke through the wall of dark clouds. Mom, you seem to be feeling well. My mother was eating a mandarin orange served as a treat after her meal. Her expression was placid as always. Yes, for some reason my body feels a little lighter today. But for once it didn't look like a mask she'd plastered on her face. The peace in her eyes seemed real, something that flowed naturally to the surface from deep inside her. Our retreat to the quiet of the countryside hadn't done much at first. If anything, our family tensions had probably taken a toll on our mother, but after many years of peace, it seemed her mind was slowly beginning to regain its equilibrium. The recent downturn had given way to weeks of steady improvement. Once you can meet your own needs, it becomes possible to worry about the needs of others. My mother had begun to give my questions real responses for the first time in years. The doctor said all signs are good. Apparently you won't have to take as much medicine starting next weekend. We've never been able to discuss her treatment, but lately it had become a safe topic of conversation. Specifically, her progress was so promising that a discharge from the hospital was coming into view at long last. Next Monday, Grandma and I will be talking to the doctor, so we'll ask about what happens next, and then... Yumiko? Huh? What is it, Mom? Yumiko, dear, I'm sorry. I said something terrible to you. You've been doing so much for me all this time, and I gave you some nonsense about wanting a boy. It's okay, Mom. Don't worry. Look, your hands are all messy from eating that orange. Here, have a tissue. I'll throw away the skin. Oh, yes, thank you. It's fine. All you need to worry about is getting better. I've got to get going now. I'll come again tomorrow. Oh, already? You don't have to rush. I'll be back tomorrow, okay? I stood up and waved goodbye with a quavery smile. My mother was still sitting in profile, but I could tell she was smiling in return. Holding that image in my mind, I slipped quietly out of the room. The moment I closed the door behind me, the world began to shimmer through a wall of tears. Mom, I'm so glad I couldn't remember the last time my mother had shown that kind of concern for me. I don't know if she ever had. By the standard of a healthy parent-child relationship, I guess it was an insignificantly small thing. But for me, at that moment, those tentative words of compassion were enough to inspire overwhelming happiness. Happiness so strong that I couldn't help but break down and sob. She's getting better. She's really getting better. I spoke the words again and again as if to fix that more firmly into reality. Perhaps Toshi-san had taken pity on me and stopped by to heal my mother on her way to heaven. Things were suddenly moving in such a positive direction that such thought seems almost plausible. Then, the next week, my grandmother and I went to meet with my mom's physician for an update on her condition. Normally, I was the only one who attended those meetings, but the progress was significant enough that he asked Grandma to come as well. Misako-san is without a doubt improving rapidly. Flipping through the papers in his hands, he gave us a detailed account of my mother's symptoms and current status. Not that I really needed to hear any of it. I already knew she was recovering. For someone who'd visited her every single day for years, it was impossible to miss the transformation. Does that mean my daughter's going to be alright? Once the doctor's explanation came to an end, my grandmother leaned forward, clinging to his arm as she spoke. Her treatment is progressing very smoothly. At this point, I think it's safe to begin preparing for her discharge and return. The moment those words left his mouth, my grandmother lowered her head so deeply I thought she might topple out of her chair and prostrate herself on the floor. Thank you so much, Doctor. Please stop, you don't have to bow to me, ma'am. Now we can finally make up everything to Sakaki and his family. Thank you so much. Grandma continued to lavish her thanks to the doctor, as always doing her best to pretend that I wasn't even in the room. Mom's return to her husband would ensure that the Kawamoto business would continue receiving support from the Sakaki family. It was blatantly obvious from my grandmother's words that it was the sole reason for her gratitude. To the woman who brought her into the world, my mother was nothing but a defective political tool, but that only strengthened my determination to take care of her. Once the doctor's explanation was over, my grandmother went straight home without even stopping by to see her daughter's face. I heard her muttering the names of business partners to herself as she went. She was probably planning to hurry back to the house and inform them of the news. Then again, I wasn't exactly eager to have her visit my mother with that sort of an attitude, so if anything, her quick departure was convenient. They decided to discharge you from the hospital next week, Mom. Dropping a pile of magazines and books onto the shelf as usual, I spoke to my mother in a tone of sincere cheerfulness. I see, then I suppose we won't have to trouble Grandma and Grandpa anymore. Yeah, and of course you won't have to hike over here every day to check up on me like this. That'll be the greatest relief of all. Mom, I feel terrible about being such a burden on you, Yumiko. My mother spoke those words with real remorse in her voice, but at that moment the burden didn't seem so heavy. My mother's feelings were more than enough compensation. Could you open the curtains for me, dear? Sure. Just as requested, I pulled back the curtains from the window at my mom's side. A vault of blue stretched out beyond the panes of glass. It was the very picture of a summer sky. Compared to the heart of the city where the Sakaki house stood, the blue in that place seemed far more pure and vivid. Nice weather again today. Yeah. When I finally leave this place, I'd like to go up to the roof just once to watch the sky. Toshi-san told me once that my mother has always enjoyed gazing at the sky. She didn't look for anything in particular, just tilted her head back and watched. And when people asked her why, she could never find an answer. Memories from the day we first came to the town flashed into my mind. We had walked hand in hand under a beautiful blue sky, but Mother's dull, lifeless eyes had never met the path below our feet. But she had finally remembered the sky. That could only mean she was on her way to recovery. That sounds nice. When they discharge you, let's look at the sky together. Yes, let's do that. It occurred to me that I didn't have a single memory of the two of us doing something like that together. I found myself very much looking forward to the small event that would accompany my mother's discharge from the hospital. Everything was moving in a positive direction. The stupidly optimistic scenario I had sketched out in my imagination was coming closer and closer to reality. My mother's recovery produced clear changes in my own emotions. I'd barely spoken to anyone in the weeks since Toshi-san's death, but I was slowly beginning to communicate with those around me. My grandparents still kept their distance, but if I approached them myself using my mother as pretext, I could at least get them to have a conversation with me. Mom's recovery was their primary objective after all. They couldn't avoid hearing me out if I brought it up. Watching my grandparents interact with me despite obvious reluctance, I felt as though I had achieved a small but significant rebellion against the people who'd spent years ignoring my very existence. I'm right here, I'm in an important position. More than anything else, that sense of meaning gave me strength. In school, the others still rejected my very existence, but that didn't bother me much anymore. I would be returning to the Sakaki house once my mother recovered. This hollow school life would be over soon enough. The end was in sight. That suffocating feeling of entrapment was gone. No matter what they said about me, no matter how they laughed, it rolled off me harmlessly. 3 days before my mother was scheduled to leave the hospital, I was hurrying to school through the rain. The drizzle that had begun a little after midnight was just picking up into a steady, heavy rain as I left the house. My umbrella wasn't enough to catch it all. Pausing for a moment, I glanced up at the angry sky beyond the edge of my umbrella. It was covered in deep black clouds from horizon to horizon, without so much as a patch of clear sky in between. Mom must be feeling a little down. Since our conversation the other day, Mom had begun to spend a lot of her time looking out the window. That was nice enough when the weather was clear, but staring up at a menacing sky like that might inspire a bit of gloominess, just as her feelings were finally starting to take an upward swing. I'd have to hurry to the hospital and cheer Mom up as soon as school was over. With that thought, I began to walk again. And just as I reached the intersection between the road and the school to the main street leading to the station, a familiar face appeared from around the corner. Hey there, been a while, Yumiko-chan. How have you been? You again? But it wasn't a face I was eager to see. I instantly recognized the tabloid reporter who had once wheedled me into becoming a source for an article that mixed fragments of truth with innuendo and lies. Standing under a large jet black umbrella that seemed to mirror the rain clouds above, he looked over me with a faint smile on his face. Well, you got awfully cute since the last time I saw you. Get those looks for your mom, or maybe your dad. His words seemed to have grown even greasier and more presumptuous than before. When I walked past him silently, the reporter fell easily in beside me, keeping pace as though I had invited him to follow. I had a little something to ask you, and I was in the neighborhood, so I decided to drop by. Think we could talk in that coffee shop or something? I believe I already informed you that I don't have anything whatsoever to discuss with you. Don't say that. We're talking about your father here, right? I'm sure there's plenty of things for us to talk about. You're mistaken. I haven't seen my father in many years. It was incredibly unpleasant to have this man bring up that topic now. The Sakaki house wasn't the invincible mass around which we all orbited. I knew my current lifestyle was possible only because of his financial support, but sometimes I couldn't help feeling a powerful burst of resentment toward the father I barely knew. In particular when people carelessly assumed we must have some kind of relationship. For the last time, I don't want to talk to you. Stop talking to me. Stop following me before any strange rumors get started. Stopping briefly, I spat out the clearest possible rejection, then quickly turned around to leave. I couldn't allow trouble of this sort to arise so soon before Mom was to leave the hospital. There was no telling how speaking to this man for even the briefest of moments might come back to haunt me. You sure about that? The reporter, no longer trying to follow, called out to me from behind. His words were suggestive, his tone unusually serious. I came to a halt despite myself. What on earth is that supposed to mean? Rationally, I understand. It would have been the same either way. I know that it wasn't the cause of what would follow. But still, somewhere deep down inside, I can't help believing everything would have been different if only I had walked away. I mean, you can't just ignore the birth of your little brother, can you? What? Little brother? When I turned back to face him, the man was wiping at his rain-damp forehead with a knowing smirk on his face. Guess you didn't see this article? Well, not the sort of magazine you'd be reading, Yumiko-chan. The reporter reached out and presented me with a magazine, already open to a certain article. Practically grabbing it from his hands, I ran my eyes frantically across the page. At the moment I saw that headline, the blood in my veins seemed to freeze solid. What is this? East Beach Express President Sakaki Michiaki's illegitimate child? Long-awaited son born to a mistress? Bold sans-serif headlines, emphasized by sharp decorative flourishes. Below, the face of a man I hadn't seen in a while lined up with a portrait of his unfamiliar partner. Paragraphs full of vicious words that I could barely stand to read, and at the very end, one sentence that plunged me below even despair. As I had doubted my ears in the hospital room weeks before, this time I doubted my eyes. Currently arranging for a divorce from his wife. Those few brief words, buried in the final paragraph as if they were the most trivial thing in the world, hit me with the force of a hurricane. This can't... I'd heard the rumors. I'd more or less understood that father was that sort of person. But there was no worse way to have those suspicions confirmed. Why? Why now when my mother was recuperating in the hospital? Why now when she was finally getting better? Was this article even true? Many thoughts swirled chaotically through my head. My hands trembled and lost their hold on the hateful piece of paper. Whoa, hey now, don't drop it. This is a source in its own right, you know. The magazine fell to the wet pavement with a slap. As it hit the ground, the pages that had been folded back flipped around, revealing the cover. And as if to turn the dagger in my wound, one final piece of information was revealed to me. Wait, this magazine? A tasteful work from a well-known painter, behind a number of carefully arranged headlines in firm serif typeface. A weekly magazine, but one that clearly distinguished itself from the tabloids and gossip racks. A magazine of some credibility. A magazine my mother asked for every week. Yeah, so that's how it is. I'd love to hear your thoughts over this on this as a new big sister, if you could spare. Wait, hey! Charging off the sidewalk that ran alongside the prefectural highway, I sprinted all out along the farm road, slanting diagonally all the way through fields of green. The path didn't turn toward my school, so it offered an ever so slightly more direct route. But it was only a farm road. In places it hadn't even been paved. It was an extremely difficult course to run on a rainy day. If Mom reads that... But I didn't have the luxury of worrying about that right at the moment. I needed to get to the hospital as soon as I possibly could. I needed to stop my mother. With the recent improvement in her condition, Mom had started to leave her room and visit the hospital store to purchase her own books and magazines. If the nurses were still delivering them with the mail, there was at least a chance they'd check for articles that might upset her. But it was hard to imagine the clerks in the shop would have been told to do the same. Why? Why did this have to... Halfway there, I could no longer muster the effort to keep my umbrella upright above me. I let the rain strike me and focused all my attention on running. Water went flying with every heavy stride, slapping against my legs, soaking my skirt. The small ember of satisfaction warming my chest only minutes before had been smothered completely out of existence. I was cold to my very core. Excuse me, no running in the hallways, please. I'm sorry. My momentum barely slowed after arriving at the hospital. I understood perfectly well that running in the hallways was off limits, but the rules I'd always obeyed mattered less than reaching my destination even a moment sooner. Mom! Mom! Turning a corner of the third floor, I finally entered the wing reserved for private rooms. A moment later, my feet came to an abrupt halt. Huh? There was something unusual going on in front of that familiar door. For a moment, I was simply bewildered. 3 strange men in expensive suits were standing just outside my mother's room, talking to each other, just on the verge of entering. A vague but powerful sense of dread ran through my body like a jolt of electricity. What are you doing here? I shouted angrily as I approached. The man who had been reaching for the door hesitated. Before I could continue, the white-haired man at the head of the little group preempted me with a question. Pardon me, but who are you? I'm the daughter of Sakagi Misako, who's currently recuperating in this room, and who are you people supposed to be? What do you want with my mother? Unperturbed by my fierce attitude, the white-haired man answered with a calm smile. Ah, so you're Yumiko-san, yes? My apologies for not introducing myself. My name is Suda, currently serving as the Sakagi family's chief legal advisor. Legal advisor? Indeed, I have a minor matter to discuss with your mother, so I decided to drop by for a visit. Do you know if she's in? The magazine article I read minutes before flashed vividly before my eyes. Currently arranging for a divorce. In a heartbeat, my mind connected those words to this lawyer's sudden arrival. I won't let you see her. What? You came here to celebrate the divorce between Mom and Dad, didn't you? My mom's not well. You have to understand what's going to happen if you discuss that with her now. Yumiko-san, you seem to be under a grave misunderstanding. We're simply here to discuss your mother's future and your own. Liar! I read it all in the magazine just now. I know everything. The man's composed face distorted into a scowl at the word magazine. He must have been trying to reach us before that information did. Nothing for it, I guess. Hey! Yeah? With a small movement of the lawyer's hand, the 2 men who had been hanging back moved quickly toward me. Huh? They had me physically subdued before I could even register surprise. One man slipped behind me and caught my arms in a firm full Nelson. The other stood in front of me like a wall, eliminating any chance of escape. Let me go! I screamed desperately, but they weren't the sort of people to flinch at the cries of a young woman. The private wing was never a busy place. Today, it was entirely empty. And with the heavy rain drumming down outside, I doubt anyone elsewhere in the building even heard my voice. And of course, against the strength of 2 full-grown adults, a child like myself was completely powerless. Please behave yourself for the moment, miss. The lawyer's voice had grown cold. It was the all-too-familiar voice of an adult. Sakaki Misako-san, my name is Suda. I'm an attorney. I have something to discuss with you, if that will be acceptable. Please excuse the intrusion. His words were extremely polite. If anything, that made them all the more frightening. Stop it! Ignoring my tear-choked plea, he pushed open the door to my mother's hospital room. What? I was the first to react. The bed sitting by the window, which had always been occupied before, was now empty. Stepped out, eh? Well, that's alright. Let's just wait here for her return. In contrast to the perpetual calm lawyer, I was filled with a profound sense of unease. The doctors always made their rounds at this time of the day. None of the patients were allowed to move around freely, much less my mother. They'd given her normal space for the sake of camouflage, but by all rights she belonged in a room with bars on the windows. Normally it wouldn't have been unusual to move a patient only 3 days from a discharge back into the hospital general ward, but my mother's condition was still delicate. The physician had decided to handle everything cautiously until the very end. It just wasn't possible that Mom had simply stepped out at this time of day. What is this? Who are you people? The doctor had arrived for his daily rounds. For a moment he simply stared at the bizarre scene inside the room, with confusion in his eyes. Doctor, my mother's missing! Before the lawyer could stand to offer a greeting, I yelled out from the corner where the man had deposited me. Wait, what? I thought I'd been told she was resting in the bed only a few minutes ago. Isn't that right? He turned to the nurse at his side for confirmation, a hint of alarm in his voice. Yes, I'm sure she was here. The startled nurse looked around the room as if expecting to find my mother hiding in a corner. This can't be happening. It was all too much for me to process. Everything was moving forward smoothly only an hour ago. But now we were here, we were derailed, hurtling rapidly away into darkness and confusion, all of our painstaking work falling apart around us. I had to look for my mother, I had to keep her from finding out about that article, I had to get out of this room, away from these people. Countless thoughts stampeded wildly through my head, but there was just one thing that seemed clear to me. I couldn't just sit here waiting. Before anything else, I had to find Mom. And all of a sudden, I remembered. When I finally leave this place, I'd like to go out to the roof just once to watch the sky. The words rang out so clearly in my ears that for a moment I thought she was really there, speaking to me. Move! Pushing my way around the man who'd been holding me in check, I slipped past the doctor and dashed out the deserted hallway. Hey, where do you think you're going? I heard voices from behind. I ignored them. I didn't have any real proof, but there was nothing else for me to go on, so I had no choice but to cling to my intuition. Taking the stairs 2 at a time, I headed for the very top of the building. By the time I managed to struggle all the way to the rooftop, my breath was coming in quick, rapid grasps, and my legs were burning beneath me. I felt about ready to collapse. After all, I had sprinted from my house to the hospital, and then from Mom's room up to the roof, with barely a pause in between. But my exhaustion was the last thing on my mind. I threw myself against the door with the last of my momentum, swinging it open wide. Mom! Alone in the dark, engulfed by the roar of the rainstorm, I screamed for my mother. It was coming down so hard now that the mist was rising from the bare concrete. Even seeing across the rooftop was a challenge. Naturally enough, given the weather, I couldn't make out any signs of human presence. She's not here? But just as I muttered those words, a white shadow stirred in the darkness. Huh? It was a human being. A woman dressed in the white clothes of her patients, standing in the rain. From her height and the length of her hair, I realized at once that it was my mother. Mom! Mom! I splashed through the puddles to her side. She was staring blankly out into the sky, battered by the powerful rain, her entire body utterly soaked. What are you doing? You can't be outside right now, the rain's... I grabbed my mother by the shoulder and shook her frantically, trying to catch her attention. But her eyes were fixed on the sky. She didn't as much as budge. It was obvious at a glance that something was terribly wrong. Mom, what's wrong with... Halfway through the sentence, I noticed something lying at the ground, at the very edge of my peripheral vision. It was flapping around in the wind. Huh? I had the feeling I'd seen it before. Not that long ago, in fact. That cover, that tasteful painting, the work of a well-known artist. Those headlines set in a restrained professional font. Ah. The magazine containing that article was lying at my mother's feet. No, no. My hand slipped off her shoulder. I staggered backward, barely staying on my feet. Why had this happened? Why did everything have to fall apart just when we were finally starting to move forward? Why was my mother standing there soaking wet? Why did she have that blank expression on her face? Many questions bubbled to the surface of my mind. None of them had answers. They just sat there suspended in my mind, stagnating until they petrified into a pool of solid sludge. My mother fixed her lifeless eyes on mine. I was startled. It was the first time for as long as I could remember that my mother had looked me straight in the face. But that was without a doubt the worst possible way for that chain to be broken. I'm sorry, but who are you again? There was no light in Mom's eyes. The words she spoke posed a question, but there was nothing like actual curiosity behind them. It was the voice of a machine. What are you saying? I wanted desperately to convince myself she was joking, but no matter how I tried, I couldn't make myself believe it. The evidence before my eyes was simply too powerful. Who are you? Mom's face was paler than white, and at the center of her white eyes were two bottomless dark wells where her pupils had been. Those tiny spots of black seemed more vast and more profound than the black sky stretching out endlessly above us. I was standing on the edge of an abyss, and I was afraid. It felt as though I might fall into those pools of darkness and despair. But I couldn't stop staring. I couldn't avert my eyes from that thing that was trying to swallow me whole. After all, she was the only person left in the world who'd ever acknowledged my existence. Mom! I called out to her, praying the word might pull her back from across the chasm that separated us. But it was too wide. My voice was too weak. I was too weak. No! No, no! I shrunk away, just one step. My heels slid backward across the wet roof. And then, for just a moment, it felt as though my body was floating. Disoriented by the sharp impact to my backside, I didn't realize I had been pushed out of the way until I saw the doctor moving past me. Hurry up, get her to a different wing. Don't let the other patients see her. Yes. As I sat stunned on the wet concrete, they took my vacant-eyed mother in their arms. They were carrying her off like an oversized doll, away from me to some place I didn't know. No! No! Pushing myself up off the ground, screaming, I ran toward her. I didn't make it 3 steps before another Lilith caught me in her arms. Don't take her! Don't take Mom away! It's alright, Yumiko-san, it's alright. No, stop! Stop it! Don't take her away! Rising above the pattering of the black rain, a baleful roar filled the air. Crawling up from the depth of the earth, demolishing everything in its path. That sound, like a massive boulder tumbling relentlessly across the world, merged with the scene before my eyes and engraved itself violently into my heart. Mom! I tried to follow with my eyes as they carried her away. I strangled out a final cry. In response, the world filled with intense light, as though a dozen cameras had flashed at once. For a moment, I was dazzled. And by the time my vision returned to normal, there was nothing left to see. No, not quite nothing. On that otherwise empty roof, one waterlogged magazine remained. It was dissolving by now, paper melting away, ink blurring into illegibility, but my memory of the truth it contained wouldn't disappear so easily. My broken mother was gone. The doctor who'd smiled and told me she'd be leaving the hospital was gone. I was absolutely alone. Mommy... I crumbled where I stood. My knees hit the ground first, then my hands, and then my face. The wet concrete was pleasantly cold against my cheek. Maybe if I lay here long enough, I could melt away and disappear. Just like that magazine. So cold. So hot. The ground was cold, but my body was hot. I used up everything I had. I was empty. I'd given up the very idea of moving. The merciless rain continued to pour down on me. Jet black rain, even though it wasn't night. The vicious dark water pooled around me, creeping up my body as if to swallow me whole. Sometimes I hate this country, that this country has 4 seasons. Just when I'm finally starting to forget, an autumn wind reminds me of a whispered insult. Winter skies bring back cold and lonely memories. And in summer, when the sudden evening storms arrive, I'm torn apart with every clap of thunder. Again and again, until there's nothing left. 1 year after my mother's relapse, things had quieted down. The commotion at the hospital created a bit of a stir around town, but it didn't take long for the talk to trickle to a halt. For one thing, the main character in the story was no longer a resident. and even our cold-hearted country gossips seemed hesitant to turn a gravely ill woman's condition into one of their nasty little jokes. I was absent from school for a week after the incident, recovering from shock and a mild case of pneumonia, but my life eventually returned to its normal rhythm. That would be the superficial summary, at least. The trauma of reading that magazine article led to a dramatic downturn in my mother's condition. She was now suffering from acute memory loss. Her physician, my grandparents, my father, and me, we were all strangers to my mom now. Everyone she met slipped out of her mind within minutes. These symptoms were far beyond anything a local hospital was equipped to handle. Soon after the incident, Mom was transferred to a specialized psychiatric institution in North Kanto. Ironically enough, that divorce never actually came to pass. Perhaps my father backed off out of concern for his public image. That, or it was part of some conditional legal arrangement. I don't know. One thing, however, was perfectly clear. The connection between the Sakaki and Kawamoto houses had been severed. My two families spent the first month after the incident squabbling by proxy about legal issues and the care of their mutual burdens. In the end, the Sakaki continued to cover my mother's medical expenses, but they were no longer providing supplementary support to the Kawamoto's family's floundering businesses. We made them take responsibility for Misako, but now they're cutting off the aid entirely. What do you intend to do, dear? Well, just have to tighten the belts and get through this. I'm sorry, but you'll have to put up with it for now. To think the long-standing Kawamoto house would be reduced to such meager lifestyles, and they expect us to take care of that girl on top of it all? Utterly ridiculous. Honestly, what did we do to deserve this? Even long after the matter was settled, my grandparents never seemed to tire of moaning about the unfairness of it all. And of course, as the easiest target for their bitterness, I once again found myself wedged between a rock and a hard place. I had the bare minimum required for a normal life. They always kept up appearances after all, but not a day went by I didn't hear sarcastic, scornful words from the shadows. I went to a silent school and returned to a silent home. I lost my refuge, I lost my hope. All I could do was suffer quietly. This would be the point where a normal person might go bad. But I had been living inside a cage for so long that not even that choice was available to me. There was a time, just once, when I tried approaching a group of girls with that sort of reputation. The result was pathetic. In that country town, even the delinquents were mindful of appearances. They turned their backs on me and walked away without a word. Shunned even by those lowest on the totem pole. For a long moment I just stood there, rooted to the spot. And then I found myself looking up into the sky. It looked no different from the day I gazed out the window with my mother. Had Mom always been alone? Was that why she spent so much time watching something that never really changed? Now that I was well and truly isolated, I'd begun to think more about her feelings. I can't even cry. It seemed like a moment worthy of a little sobbing, but it just wasn't happening. On that day in the rain, I'd used up my lifetime supply of tears. All that was left was a parched, withered husk of a human being. For one long year I did nothing but watch the sky change slowly above me. But soon enough I was pulled into the muddy stream once again. It was a little before the start of summer vacation. My teacher had fallen ill that afternoon. The final lesson was replaced by a study hall, which I'd spent gazing dully out the window. That exercise in pure boredom finally complete, I was walking sluggishly down the road toward my grandparents' house, just turning the final corner onto a street. Huh? Something was wrong about this picture. A shiny black luxury car was parked along the thickly hedged road in front of our house. The Kawamoto family didn't own a private automobile. My grandfather apparently had one back in the days when the business was doing well, but it was one of the first things to go when the recession hit. The negotiation with the Sakaki family has always been held in the business office by the station, so it was hard to imagine why such a car could possibly come here. I wonder who that is. For a little while I dawdled outside, staring curiously at the car with its thickly tinted windows. But after 2 or 3 minutes, a voice called to me from inside our house. "You're late, Yumiko-chan. Come on in. Hurry." What? I was startled. The friendly attitude was one thing, but it was the very first time since I'd arrived that my grandmother had called me by name. She wouldn't have done that without a very good reason. Yes. After quickly removing my shoes, I let her usher me into the parlor. It was the first time in a good 4 years that I'd been in that room. The instant I crossed the threshold, 5 men in black suits stood up, simultaneously and bowed in greeting. As I blinked in bewilderment, my grandmother spoke, a strange little smile twisting her face. Come on, Yumiko-chan, sit down right here. This discussion isn't going anywhere without you. And with that, she sat me at the head of the table. The dusty air of the rarely used parlor tickling my nose. I looked around me. All 5 of the men had deeply serious expressions on their faces. To be honest, I wanted nothing more than to run away. What on earth is this all of a sudden? As soon as the question left my mouth, a man seated to my left took control of the conversation. Yumiko-sama, we come for you on the instructions of your father, Sakaki Michiaki-sama. Come for me? Yes, your father has been very worried about you since the incident last year. Accordingly, we were sent here to take you home. What on earth was this man talking about? After the incident with Mom, my father hadn't showed up in this house even once. I understood that he had a busy professional life, but he didn't even bother to send us a message or place a phone call. Now they expected me to believe he was worried. Now, after a full year? Ridiculous. It was mystifying Grandma had even let them into the house in the first place, let alone with that simpering grin on her face. Didn't she understand this was nonsense? But soon I discovered that my grandmother's reactions were perfectly lucid, for reasons that had nothing to do with any of that. Isn't that wonderful, Yumiko-chan? Now you can attend a good school and live with your father again. It's certainly been a long and tangled road, but you don't have a thing to worry about anymore. I'm happy for you. Oh, and it seems your father will be holding this house again. This really is a happy day for us all. Ah, now I understood. This was a question with no choices. My grandparents had decided the answer beforehand, and were now unilaterally forcing me toward it. I was so profoundly astonished at their naked self-interest that I couldn't even manage any anger. But it's not as if snapping at them would have achieved anything in the first place. Remaining with them was probably never really an option. I understand. I'm prepared once. When I stood from my seat, my grandmother spoke in a sickeningly sweet voice. Come now, dear, there's no need to hurry. The gentlemen in the Sakaki house say they will be paying us another visit tomorrow, so until then... That's quite alright. They're paying us a visit right now, so I'll leave in that car. Oh, is that so? Well, if that's what you want to do, Yumiko-chan, I suppose there's no helping it, right, dear? Absolutely. It's completely up to you, Yumiko. I was about ready to vomit. From my grandmother's words, it seemed clear that the Sakaki had come with a clear offer in hand. My return in exchange for restored financial support to the Kawamoto business. My grandparents had considered me a burden from the start, so I imagine they didn't exactly hesitate. It probably felt like selling some piece of junk from the backyard for a huge sum at an auction. How sordid. I tried muttering the words, but couldn't manage much conviction. After all, I was scuttling around the same sordid web. How could I complain? I wasn't working for my food. I pulled all the clothes out of my chest of drawers, threw them onto my tatami mat, and scowled down at them. This is goodbye. I wasn't speaking to my grandparents, the house, or even my mother. It was a farewell to the person who had lived here, idly wasting day after empty day, accomplishing nothing but growing older. I spoke those words to confirm a simple fact. That room was nothing to me. It held nothing of me. One by one, I cut the clothes I'd worn in the place to shreds. The expensive-looking children's clothes I'd brought with me, the generic ready-made supermarket clothes my parents had brought me when the need arose, my middle school uniforms. My face an emotionless mask, I carefully chopped them into tiny pieces. All done. My preparations were complete. Grabbing the scrapped clothes with both hands, I shoved them right back into my chest of drawers. It took less than a minute to toss my everyday belongings, art supplies, sketchbooks into my bag. Just like that, my life in that place was over. I didn't look back. After a stiff formulaic goodbye to my grandparents, I dropped by my school for a few brief formalities, then began the journey home. Of course, I hadn't seen that home in many years. I had only the vaguest of memories of the house itself. I was sincerely happy to be leaving my grandparents behind, but that didn't make me any less uncertain about the new life being thrust onto me so abruptly. The car headed north at high speed, moving from the coastline into the outskirts of the metropolitan area. We were heading for the heart of West Tokyo. How much longer will it be until we arrive? An elderly man who had introduced himself as the chief of the clerical department at my father's company was behind the wheel. Unless the roads are particularly congested, we should arrive about 30 minutes from now. Glancing briefly at his GPS screen, he answered my question in a calm tone. I see. 60 kilometers, as the crow flies. That was the distance from my grandparents' homes to that of my father. In the end, my mother had never managed to return to a place less than an hour away by car, and I myself was only coming back on someone else's power. I didn't have the slightest idea what was coming next. I wasn't particularly hopeful, but I didn't feel much in the way of despair either. It would be enough if I could just spend my days quietly until I finally became an adult. With that thought, I closed my eyes and waited for the car to arrive at its destination. Just as the chief secretary had told me, we reached my new home about 30 minutes later. It's huge. The house was very different from the patchwork image I had sewn together from the fragments of my childhood memories, far more magnificent than I remembered it. From the outside, the building itself looked like a Western-style mansion straight out of a manga. The spacious gardens were surrounded by a high wall. The grounds were covered in so many tall, beautiful trees that it could have been a park. I had hazy memories of those things, but after years in the country, their scale and magnificence took me by surprise. But on an emotional level, the sight left me cold. My father's actions were one thing, my obedient return at his whistle was another. No matter how splendid the house might have been, when I thought about the foundation it was built on, my thoughts naturally took a turn for the bitter. If I was coming back with Mom, I whispered the words to myself, too softly for the driver taking my luggage from the trunk to hear. Passing through the finely wrought metal gate, I returned to the house I spent my first years in. The uninspiring luxury was all the more pronounced inside the house itself. As I took off my shoes and looked around the gleaming entrance hall, I heard footsteps approaching from a side passage. Yumiko, you're back. You really have grown up. It probably would have taken me some time to recognize the person standing in front of me, if not for the recent photograph I'd seen in a certain magazine 1 year before. Face to face with my father for the first time in what felt like decades, I saw a middle-aged man with a reasonably healthy complexion, but a subtle hint of something like gloom in his eyes. Yes, I've returned. As I lowered my head in a polite bow, my father continued in the same cheerful tone. What's the matter? You don't sound very energetic. Tired out by a long car ride? I was more taken back by anything else. Considering the way he had treated Mom and me up until that point, his aggressively friendly attitude was incomprehensible. From what I could remember, my father and I had only spoken a bare handful of times when I was a child, and certainly never like that. His motives weren't clear to me, but the sudden attempt at intimacy was off-putting. I didn't quite know how to respond to it. Alright, I'll just go back to my room and rest for a while. For the moment, I just wanted to cut the nauseating conversation short. Right, of course, whatever you want, Yumiko. Please excuse me. With another bow to my father, I made my way past him, heading for the one part of the house I remembered well. My very first place of refuge, the bedroom in which I had spent so many hours as a young child. I climbed the stairs and found my room without the slightest hesitation. Remembering its location so exactly prompted a brief swell of nostalgic emotion, but that soon gave way to the recurring sense of disgust. My memories there weren't exactly happy in their own right. Huh? The room I entered for the first time in years was so completely changed that I couldn't help raising my voice in surprise. The badly mismatched desk and bed had been cleared away. The place was a complete arrangement of fancy furniture and pretty little luxury items, exactly the sort of things that might appeal to a girl of my age. They went out of their way to prepare this? Every part of the decor seemed as if it would have come straight from the set of a movie. The room was filled with fragile, ephemeral things. It felt as though they'd disappear like soap bubbles if I actually touched them. Normally they would have made me happy, but the moment it seemed like a hollow gesture. I'm home, Mom. Sitting on my bed, I murmured those words to myself. I'd finally managed to return to that house, but my mother wasn't with me. All I had there was a forced artificial welcome from the man who had broken her. Would I simply resume the same numb, miserable life in a different setting? Staring up at the ceiling, I could feel the familiar jet-black sludge growing thick inside my chest. I fought down the crushing feeling of despair as best I could, closed my eyes and fell asleep. The next day, my father had arranged beforehand for my transfer into an all-girls school some 20 minutes before from the mansion by a car. It was a very prestigious institution. I actually recognized the name. I felt badly out of place, uncomfortable with my new uniform and the beautiful school building. Hey, is that girl? Right, from the Sakaki family. I could hear the whispers from all sides. Entering the classroom, I sat quietly at an open desk as far from the others as possible. There wasn't an improvement in one regard. The talk about me wasn't particularly cruel or hostile. There's gotta be something going on with her. Yeah, she seems a bit difficult to approach. But essentially I was treated just like before. My classmates interacted with me in a business-like way, when necessary, and otherwise largely pretended that I wasn't there. A school full of young ladies from upper-crust families was surprisingly uncomfortable in its own way. Nice weather. Having completed my formulaic introduction and the first day of classes, I found myself instinctively heading for the rooftops. After gazing up for a moment, I settled down against the concrete support near the edge of the roof and took out my sketchbook. I began to draw the sky above me. A simple pencil hatching, rendering the clouds and sky as shades of grey. That afternoon, I couldn't stand to look at the world. Anything my eyes settled on repulsed me. That empty sky was the only thing I could bring myself to observe calmly. The driver held open the front door to the house for me. I was delivered to school and back. I didn't even have to open my own doors anymore. That extreme courtesy only intensified my discomfort. Welcome home, miss. The household employees greeted me with smiles so soft and mild it was slightly nauseating. When I answered with a brief nod, they began to bombard me with words in rapid succession, their tone eager and openly professional. Yumiko-sama, would you care for anything to eat? No, that's all right. I'm going to return to my room. In that case, shall I bring you a drink of some sort? That's all right as well. I'm not particularly thirsty. In that case, please inform us if there's anything at all that we can do for you. Yes. Climbing slowly up the stairs, I heaved a heavy sigh. Will they be putting on that sort of show every single day from now on? The difference was so transparently artificial that it was painful rather than flattering. Given my current position, it just might be possible to order them to stop acting like that. But I didn't know what repercussions that would have, especially if they were to report it to my father. I ended up deciding it best not to make waves at such an early stage. I'd been able to postpone it for one day with excuses about my fatigue, but the time had come. It's been a long time since we had a meal together like this, hasn't it? A glass of wine in one hand, my father turned a radiant smile on me. Yes. Inside my head I spat out the words, it's the first time. From the moment I sat down in front of that luxurious dinner and my beaming father, I was immediately filled with a desperate longing to flee. I tried a little of the sautéed duck on my plate just to kill a few seconds, but it seemed strangely tasteless and without texture. Your teacher's already singing your praises. Your results on the admission test were superb. It seems the difference in academic level compared to your old school shouldn't be much of a problem. My father, still maintaining the same cheerful tone as the night before, complimented me at great length. Yes. All I could manage was to nod and mechanically shovel the food placed in front of me into my mouth. Course after course, and I couldn't taste a thing. Had they even put any salt on these? It was like eating hunks of rubber. Carrying things to my mouth solely for the sake of chewing on them didn't make for a pleasant dining experience. Gradually I began to ignore my plate in favor of frequent sips of water. I feel sick. The tasteless food, Dad's barrage of praise, and myself sitting there passively just accepting it all. Everything about the scene made me sick. My emotions only grew darker with every passing minute. This was all some bizarre whim of my father's. That, or a meaningless ceremony he was carrying out in pursuit of some hidden objective. What else could it possibly be? Yumiko, have you been letting your hair grow out all this time? I felt my breath catch in my throat. That summer day, the day when the heat had poured down on me like a rain of molten iron. The moment when I had clawed at my chest and hacked at my own hair in a spasm of self-loathing, it all came flooding vividly back. Yes. I almost told him that I'd cut it short once, but what would be the point of explaining that to this man? It would only throw this little play into chaos. What on earth did my father mean by asking me a question like that? Why bring up the very thing that had always marked me as worthless? I see. I have to say it really suits you. My father, a smile on his face, spoke those words in a casual tone of voice. Yumiko? Excuse me. Rising from my seat, I ran out of the room, both hands pressed tightly across my mouth. Hey, what was in that food? I could hear my father snarling at someone behind me, but I didn't have time to be worrying about it. Acid burned my mouth as I vomited the tasteless food out in the toilet bowl. None of it had the slightest flavor going down, but coming back up was powerfully unpleasant. It seems a bit unfair somehow. What sort of sick joke is this? Wasn't my sex the entire reason he'd cast Mom aside? What on earth was my father thinking? How could he say that? Why? He'd never even looked at me before. This had to be some kind of whim. He decided to play house for a while to appease his guilty conscience. Either that, or he needed to do so for some work-related reason. This place is just as bad. How long would it take before I could find a safe haven? This was no better than living with my grandparents. No, in the countryside at least I wasn't expected to do anything. There were expectations of me here. That made it even more agonizing. I don't want to play this game. Tasting the acid rising once more from the depth of my throat, I descended into self-pity. I would truly have preferred to shut myself up in a dark shed, to reject the world and do nothing at all for the rest of my life. But as long as I needed food to eat and a bed to sleep in, I had no choice but to play along with my father's momentary kindness. The thought triggered a new wave of nausea. One week passed. People often say that time flies when you're having fun. Perhaps it's true, because those first 7 days seemed to last a century. Hanging my bag next to my desk, I pulled out my notes and textbooks. I was as isolated and out of place as ever in my new school. I'd been studying a good deal, but that was simply my way of killing the vast stretches of otherwise painfully empty time I spent here. It certainly had absolutely nothing to do with my father's praise. I hadn't sketched for a few days now. For one thing, the weather had been dull and grey, so I couldn't look up without remembering that day, and I just hadn't been in the mood in the first place. Even if I opened my sketchbook today, I'd only end up with another drawing of the sky. As if I didn't have enough of those already. Those vaguely self-mocking thoughts stopped me on the way up to the roof, redirecting my path down to the lower floor. My life was a steady line from one meaningless moment to the next. Identical days trickled by, but there was one thing that had begun to change in the course of that week. Human beings are frighteningly adaptable creatures. The meals with my father that had first repulsed me to the point of vomiting were gradually growing tolerable. Sometimes I hated myself for that, but little by little I was coming to understand that it wasn't just a result of my mind acclimatizing itself to the situation. Oh, have you gotten used to your new school, Yumiko? Yes. It must be a little nerve-wracking transferring in so suddenly, but I'm sure you'll make friends soon enough. Back in my day, my father was making a genuine effort. With gentle advice and anecdotes about his own experience, he tried to reassure me. Apparently Dad had gone through many transfers in his student years and always struggled with how to present himself to new classmates. I was beginning to learn a number of surprisingly personal things about my father, as he persistently tried to draw me into conversation. But then again, I guess everything must be very, very different these days. Sorry to lecture you, Yumiko. That's alright. And he wasn't pushy or arrogant about it. He always seemed to be considering my point of view. Just as I'd heard, Dad was on an extremely tight schedule. Even when he returned home, it was extremely rare for him to stay overnight. More frequently, he would return to his company immediately after dinner. But that also meant he was coming home solely to share a meal with me. I gradually grew less prickly and slightly more communicative. By now I could eat dinner with him without a hint of queasiness. What is it, Yumiko? No, it's nothing. Just as something was about to spill out of my mouth, Mom's pale, empty face had flashed before my eyes. I silently reminded myself, this man is responsible for my mother's suffering. That fundamental resentment hadn't faded. I wouldn't let it fade. Lying in bed in my darkened room, I thought things over. I was no less uncertain than when I first arrived at that place, but the reasons for that inner turmoil were beginning to change. My father's attitude toward me was becoming harder to process, At first, I'd simply been disgusted by his over-familiarity. But by that point, it was harder to dismiss as some bizarre game. Sometimes I could almost take his friendliness at face value. Even that remark about my hair might have been intended as nothing more than casual compliment. Such positive interpretations were beginning to seem plausible. A little late for that now. I tried mumbling negative words to myself, but the nagging doubt remained. My distant mother had grown kind when her condition improved. The situation was clearly different, but there was always the possibility that my father had undergone a similar change in the years since I'd seen him last. Tossing and turning in my bed, I turned the questions over in my mind. I'd been so cold for so long, but little by little I could feel something like warmth returning to my body. I'll just end up being betrayed again. This time will be different. With two opposing answers battling indecisively in my mind, I waited for dawn to come. 2 months after my return to Tokyo, my life was beginning to change even outside of the house. School didn't seem particularly unpleasant anymore. It wasn't so difficult being alone in that place once you got used to it. So long as I quietly attended my classes, the entire day would pass easily enough. I never disliked studying, so once my mood took a turn for the better, it didn't feel like wasted time. The change in the seasons had brought more periods of clear weather. I resumed my habit of drawing on a daily basis. And as my mind grew calm, my art slowly began to change as well. My perspective, pointed straight up for so long, began to creep downward. Every once in a while I'd include a townscape or two among my sketches. It wasn't exactly principled of me to be finding enjoyment in that life, but there was no point in sulking forever. My sardonic feelings of self-reproach slowly faded. I began to look at the world around me more calmly. Welcome home, miss. I'm back. Even those brutally awkward interactions with the household employees had gotten more tolerable with the passage of time. After a few weeks, they picked up on my non-reactions and began to tone down their aggressive reproach. They would generally back off after letting me know they were available if I needed them. That arrangement was much more comfortable for me. By then, I actually was asking them for something every once in a while. Will you be heading straight to your room today? Yes, I think so. Very well. Have a pleasant evening. After asking the maid to have someone call me when it was time for dinner, I returned to my room. Sitting down in front of my desk, I thought back over the last few months. My attitude toward that new life were beginning to soften in many ways. The one exception, I was stubbornly continuing to keep my father at arm's length. His behavior hadn't changed. He continued to treat me kindly all the while. Nonetheless, I offered him nothing but brief, monosyllabic answers, vaguely avoiding his questions. That had seemed only natural at first. What else could he expect after how he treated my mother? After abandoning me for years, the resentment seemed to justify my behavior. But months had passed, and I couldn't just see any sign of the cruel man I thought he was. At least not when he was interacting with me. Nearly every night I rejected his gentle attempts to draw me into conversations. My father didn't seem to be letting that bother him, but I was beginning to feel increasingly guilty about my attitude. What am I supposed to do? I threw the question up at my ceiling, knowing all too well that no answer would be forthcoming. It would be time for dinner soon. For a very different reason than before, I had started to find that time somewhat painful. You came up again today. A professor from Meguro Medical School told everyone Sakagi-san's daughter is cute as a button and smart as a whip. I see. It makes me very happy that you've grown up into such a fine young lady, Yumiko. This man had interacted with me as something close to an ideal father for 2 straight months. That day, as always, all that came out of his mouth were words of praise and concern for me. Uneasy feelings smoldered away quietly inside my chest. Tell me, Yumiko. My father spoke to me in a kind tone of voice. I couldn't even endure his gaze. I found myself hanging my head. Yumiko? I didn't dislike being praised. Not at all. He was making time in an extremely busy life for me. I wasn't yet cynical enough to miss that. Sometimes I felt myself on the verge of being grateful. I'm sorry. But no, not yet. That black grime was still inside me. There was always that other emotion struggling against my guilt. So long as that remained, I would never allow myself to get any closer to my father. Is this about your mother? I felt myself twitch with surprise. Until that point I had deliberately steered clear of that particular topic. I'd assume my father was intentionally avoiding it as well, so the turn of conversation came as a real shock. I was never sure if I should talk to you about it, but I can't expect you to understand if I don't complain myself, can I? I'm not. It's alright. I was in the wrong here. My father slowly began to speak. He spoke about his feeling towards my mother, how it felt when she left, and behind everything, the constant stress of his incredibly demanding job had placed on their marriage. Everything my father told me turned my image of him completely on its head. When the two of you left, I thought my heart was going to break. There were many times when I was about ready to go and take you both back. But I was drowning in work and I never found the courage to try. In time, my increasingly isolated father began to seek comfort. He admitted that the affair described in the magazine article had happened at the time. I was lonely too, and there was so much going on at the company. I knew it was wrong, but I ended up betraying your mother. When I heard about that magazine article, the first thing on my mind was protecting your mother from the consequences of my mistake, so I sent over the lawyer right away, but it was consistent. The actions that had seemed so inhumanely cruel at the time could also be explained by my father's story. After all, that lawyer never got the chance to speak with my mother. There was no proof he'd been sent to serve her with divorce papers, but even so. Yumiko, my father looked straight into my face from across the table. I couldn't help myself. I returned his gaze. At some point, I had forgotten even to avert my eyes. Do you think you could forgive me? It was a gentle voice. I'd begun to think I would never hear a voice like that ever again, from anyone. And yet, it was coming to me from him, the person whose acceptance, in a way, I always wanted most. Many thoughts flooded into my head in a confused jumble. Those words were more than powerful enough. My fragile defensive wall had finally sprung a leak. I'm sorry. Yumiko? I'm sorry, Dad, I need to... I stood from my chair, turned away from that concerned face, and hurried out to the hallway. Halfway covering my face with my right hand, I stumbled up the stairs as best I could. On the way up, I caught a glimpse of a servant staring at me in shock, but I wasn't composed enough to pay that any mind. The world was growing hazy before I even reached my floor. Oh. And the instant I closed the door to my room behind me, the tears came pouring down my face. One drop stained the ivory carpet beneath my feet, then another. I can't believe... Dad said... It was hard to understand. I couldn't reconcile the man with the vicious, vulgar persons the magazines described. There were so many things about him that confused me. But I couldn't believe he'd spoken those words for show. It sounded as if they'd come from the heart. Just as Mom had come to regret the cruel things he said to me, perhaps Dad was simply trying to make up for his mistakes. Looking at it from that angle, it wouldn't be so hard to accept his apology. Would it be alright? Tell me, Mom. I had one photograph of my mother left, safe in the memory of my mobile phone. But as always, her face was turned to the side. I couldn't read her expression. Would it be alright if I really did become happy? My life had been shades of grey for so very long. Little by little, I could see colours beginning to emerge. It was a pleasant feeling. The air was still a little cold, but the sky that day was remarkably beautiful. Putting down my brush, I stretched out and muttered a few words to no one in particular. I suppose that's enough for today. Recently, I'd been getting so absorbed in my art that it was easy to forget time. There'd been a few incidents where I kept my car waiting long enough to cause some anxiety, so I started making a conscious effort to check my watch frequently. I examined my sketchbook. Instead of the sky that I'd been devoted to for so long, today I had painted a rooftop flower bed. I'm even painting things like this now. After a month of obsessively sketching the clouds, the change had taken me by surprise. For a while I just gazed down at that image, various emotions running through me. Oh no, I'll be late! I hurriedly gathered up my painting materials and pushed them into my bag. As it turned out, I was a little slow coming home after all. My life changed rapidly after my father's apology. The dinners together had once been so painful were now something I looked forward to. I talked to him about many things. My art, formerly sketches of the sky and a black pencil, had become increasingly colorful work executed with paintbrushes. Even my life at school was shifting ever so slightly for the better. Sakage-san, do you have a moment? Ida-san? Of course. The girl who stood out even among the young ladies in our class, Ida Kanako, had begun to approach me on a regular basis. I didn't quite follow this part. Would you mind helping me? Oh, classical literature translation? This definitely was a tricky one. Oh, hold on just a second. We struck up a conversation about our work in art class one day, and it had been talking like this pretty frequently ever since. She wasn't quite a friend yet, but up until now I'd almost never had actual conversations in school with anyone but the teachers. By my standard, it was an enormous step forward. Thank you, that was very helpful. Your explanations are always so clear and concise, Kasagaki-san. No, I wasn't doing anything special. That's not true. You might make a very good teacher someday. A perfectly normal, unremarkable little scene. But in comparison to the emptiness of my life before then, those moments made every day feel astonishingly fresh and new. Welcome back, Dad. Hello there, Yumiko. I'm home. Dad was still an incredibly busy man. Nonetheless, he would always come home at least a few times every week to have dinner with me. I used to only see his face during the meal itself, but I recently started greeting him at the door with a natural smile on my face. So, today, Ida-san and I talked for a long time. Oh, that friend you were telling me about before? No, we're not quite friends yet, but previously my father had talked and talked while I offered only brief responses, but the situation was largely reversed. I told Dad about everything, every trivial little thing in my life. No matter what the topic, he never failed to hear me out with a smile. That made me happy. You know, Yumiko. What is it, Dad? Once Misako gets better, why don't the three of us take a trip abroad? Huh? I've always been so busy that I never really had the chance to do anything like that for you. Maybe you have something else in mind? I'd like to go to an amusement park. An amusement park? Come on, you can go to one of those anytime you like. Yeah, but I'd like to go together. My father looked mystified. Still, I stuck to my guns. When I was very small and very lonely, the idea of a family visit to an amusement park had enchanted me. I was well past the age of begging for a trip like that, but that secret yearning had never really gone away. I see. Well, alright, one of the companies in the conglomerate runs an amusement park. We can reserve it and have the whole place to ourselves. Nah, it doesn't have to be anything like that. Just a normal trip. You really are a modest one, Yumiko. Okay then, once Misako Mom gets better, let's go on an amusement park. All three of us. Dad spoke those words with a smile. It was the first time I'd asked him for anything. Even as my days became happier, I had been careful not to say anything greedy, anything about the things I wanted. I suppose I couldn't quite believe that tranquil life was real. If I asked too much of the dream, I was afraid it might just fall apart underneath me. Today, Dad and I had talked about that. Okay. Ever since that day, the size of my diary entries had increased exponentially. Where I used to write, nothing happened, again and again ripping off the bottom of the page for scrap paper, now I was often running out of space before I could cover everything. And in the center of my room, a canvas stood on an easel, surrounded by a colorful array of art supplies. All things I purchased and used frequently. It's really going to be alright now, is it? Will something happen again? Will it fall apart in the blink of an eye? Everything was so peaceful that at times it made me uneasy. Come to think of it, those few days before my mother was scheduled to leave the hospital had felt very much the same. Maybe I'll add a postscript. I hope this lasts forever. I'm quite sure I scribbled those words at the end of my diary entry. It was the one small wish I would allow myself. The rainy season had come and gone. Summer was fast approaching. It was a day like any other. Reading on the internet that the weather would be taking a turn for the worse in the afternoon, I called off my usual rooftop painting session and went home a little early. Could you let me out here, please? Are you sure? It's still a bit of a walk.
I'm in the mood for a little fresh air. They said it would be raining in the evening, but for the moment it was a pleasant afternoon, well suited to a bit of light exercise. Therefore, I got out of the car halfway and walked the remaining kilometer or so home. There wasn't any real reason for that, it was just a whim. When I opened the front door and slipped inside, I found the entrance hall empty of the servants who were usually there to greet me. No one's here? It was probably because I'd returned so suddenly. Even when I closed the door behind me, the hallway remained silent. Maybe they're in the kitchen. Not that it really bothered me either way. I began to move toward the stairs. So, in regards to that, Yumiko-sama doesn't seem to have noticed anything. But a voice from deeper in the hallway stopped me in my tracks. If that woman hadn't happened to speak my name at that very moment, without a doubt I would have shrugged, gone up the stairs to my room and stayed completely oblivious. They are talking about me? I slowly inched my way down the passage, careful not to make a sound, and stopped just before a corner. From the other side I could hear the 3 employees who usually met me at the door talking about something. Everything seems to be proceeding smoothly enough for the moment then. Yes, Yumiko-sama seems to have completely taken to the master by now. I see. Well, good to hear. Sakagi-sama has instructed us to remain vigilant regarding her behavior. Make sure to let me know if anything happens. Of course. They were speaking quietly, but I could make out their conversation clearly enough. What are they talking about? I shouldn't be listening to this. My throbbing heart was making that very clear. But my feet wouldn't budge, and my ears were intent on capturing every word of their discussion. Seriously though, this is quite the change of heart drama. Didn't think he had it in him. The son and heir apparent dies, and all of a sudden he grabs it all of the best grades and the most submissive personality. So I guess that was not exactly hard to understand, is he? That mistress of his sure didn't stick around long after her kid died. Well, lost her meal ticket and all. My body had begun to tremble. It was a part of the story I had almost pushed out of my mind by now. That mistress, and the boy she'd supposedly given birth to. He died? I'd always thought it strange. Why had Dad called me for me when he did? Why suddenly approach a daughter who you'd tossed aside once before? But you have to give the master credit for his thoroughness. I mean, hiring a detective agency to get information on his own daughter, and then he plays it off like he's been keeping a faly eye on her all along. I thought that attention was his way of atoning for my mother's suffering. Yeah, not like he had the slightest interest before, but he had to pretend otherwise to get the girl dancing on his strings. He really did go all out with that whole act. That's not gonna qualify as kind of brainwashing, is it? Start off a little awkwardly, then jab the heart of the matter and let it all come out. I hear they called in an expert to work out that strategy. I thought that was his attempt at finally becoming a father to me. And the little miss fell for it hook, line, and sinker, huh? No, I simply convinced myself it had to be that way. Deep down, I knew all along that it couldn't possibly have been true. Look, will you cut it out already? That little miss you're discussing will be coming home soon. Yes, sir. Nobody even knew she existed a little while ago, but the instant she becomes available as a tool, it's the royal treatment. By the world we live in. Of course, she'll be gone in 5 minutes flat if he manages to make himself another boy somewhere. Oh, right, there's always that option. I'd pay money to see the moment he finally drops that world best dad number. Alright, that's more than enough of that. Yes, sir. With that languid response, the group dispersed. Even long after the footsteps faded away, I stood there in silence, perfectly still. An idle question occurred to me. What sort of expressions do I have on my face right now? What sort of expression do people make at times like these? I felt oddly detached from reality, as though watching a movie projected before my eyes by some hidden camera. Eventually I took one step, then another. I dragged myself up the stairs on legs that didn't feel like my own. They said it would be raining in the evening, but the afternoon was pleasant, well suited to a bit of light exercise. Therefore I got out of the car halfway and walked the remaining kilometer or so home. There wasn't any real reason for that. There wasn't any reason at all. And so I could only curse God. I reached my room. It was far too quiet inside. I'd almost begun to forget how painful the absence of sound could be. I'd almost begun to find the silence comfortable. Okay then, once
Misako, Mom gets better. Let's go to an amusement park, all three of us.
How could you say that with a smile on your face? Scraps of notebook paper danced around me. Fragments of the word dad, fragments of the word happy, fragments of sentences highlighted in bright colors. Months and months of my life scattered through the air. The upper half of my painting was thick with dabs of blue and yellow paint. That was the first part to go. With a harsh rip, the cloth tore away from one of the screws holding it in place, and as the canvas curled in on itself, the white paint fell to the ground like a dusting of snow. In the lightless room, white, blue, and yellow flew about. Shattered and torn, powerless and broken, they melted one by one into the darkness. Unable to think, unable to act, I endured the night. The time came for me to wake up. Acting on pure reflexive habit, I stood up on unsteady feet and made my preparations. Pathetically enough, there was still part of me holding on to hope. The house was no longer a refuge, but I had begun to make a small place for myself at school. I could just make more friends, find people to talk to. Maybe that would be enough. Maybe that would be something. Ah, Ida-san. I caught a glimpse of the face I was looking for from the hallway. Ida-san might be willing. If I kept talking to her little by little, she might become my friend. Or so she says, and then Ida says seemed to be talking to somebody. I peered in through the window. She was sitting at the very center of a group of girls. I just have to talk to her later when she was alone. Sakaki-san's the child of a mistress, or that's what Dad... The child of a mistress. Those were the same hateful words they printed on the magazine that changed everything. I think I'll keep being kind to her for the moment. Huh? I don't get it. Isn't that all the more reason to ignore her? But this way I might get her to tell me some fun stories, right? Like how her mother wormed her way into the Sakaki house, or maybe... For some reason, I thought of the fruit hanging from a tree. At first it ripens and swells at the end of the branch, beautiful and tempting. But in time its coloration grows impure and unattractive. Its point of connection to the tree begins to creak from the strain. One thread of fiber snaps, then another. The thin line holding it to life and nourishment grows thinner and thinner. And finally, this moment. I heard something fall. I entered the classroom. The girls who had been snickering about me until a moment before innocently looked away and moved on to another topic of conversation. A few moments after dropping my bag by my desk, I slowly began to walk in their direction. I felt every movement of my feet with a brilliant, eerie clarity. This might be what it's like to take the last few steps toward the summit of a high mountain. A climber has the thrill of achieving something, but in the determination, the clear-minded acceptance of fate, there might be something similar. Or so I thought, a spectator to my own actions. Oh, hello, Sakaki-san. Do you need something? Ida Kanako turned to face me with her usual placid smile. I had already decided what would happen next. Familiar feelings swelled up inside me, the same as when I'd cut my hair, my diary, my canvas. What's wrong, Sakaki-san? Your face is very pale. Should we call? Ida Kanako's hand reached out to me. To my eyes, it looked like the great grasping claw of a corpse pulling me down into hell. I'd understood all along. I'd simply kept for myself from noticing. There was never any place of refuge here. I'd forced myself to believe in the lies because I couldn't keep going without them. But I'd finally found another way to live. I watched serenely as the blood spurted out. What? For a moment she couldn't even process what had happened. For just a moment she stared down blankly at her hand, at her palm, dyed in red. Ah! Ida Kanako collapsed in slow motion. Desks clattered all around, the others backed away as if distancing themselves from a live bomb. Sakaki-san? What are you doing? The teacher! Somebody call a teacher! That's right, I should have cut it all apart. I should just cut off my brain and cut my way to freedom. I was grinding my teeth so hard as hard as I could. There were tears streaming down my face. But all things considered, I didn't feel particularly sad. Much the opposite. Since the blade had finally severed me from the lies, I was filled with a strange sense of relief. It felt as though the wide, shining road forward had been revealed to me. Of course it would come to this. I shouldn't have hoped for a happy ending in the first place. Everything was scripted from the very start, and the actress has passively accepted her role, dreaming of a heartwarming conclusion to the black comedy that had been written for her. Ooh, that's... At some point, I'd begun to laugh. The tears were still rolling down my cheeks, but there were no sadness in me anymore. I left most of that behind on the day my mother broke, and the rest on the day my father betrayed me. I depleted my stock of sorrow. Just how much of a clown do I need to be? Just how pathetic do I need to become? What do I need to satisfy my cowering audience, to please the God who wrote this play? Their eyes watched me from what felt like an enormous distance, pushing me lower and lower into the dirt. It's hilarious, isn't it? I brandished the open box cutter in my right hand toward the back of the classroom. Incoherent little shrieks from my classmates were the only response. A few girls had already broken down in tears. Go ahead, everyone, laugh! You've always been watching this farce, haven't you? What's the Well, here's the punchline. Why aren't you laughing? I laughed in their place, even when the teachers who came running pinned me down, even when they carried me out of the classroom like some sort of terrorist. Wouldn't it be odder not to laugh at something so utterly ridiculous? When they took me away, I noticed my desk standing isolated in chaos, and felt a twinge of pity at leaving it behind. Until the very end, I could never see the person who supposedly sat there. My father acted swiftly once he was notified. A settlement was reached with the Ida family. The incident was erased without so much as a disciplinary hearing. At first, my father tried to coax me out of my locked room with gentle words, but I refused to acknowledge his existence. After more than a month of that siege, I was half forced out, loaded unceremoniously into a car, and brought to a town where the air smelled of salt water. I understood what sort of a place it was the moment I saw the high walls surrounding it. It was a housing facility, a pleasant little cage where I could be safely stowed away without the risk of causing further trouble. A woman who introduced herself as a principal introduced me to the school with a slightly fearful expression on her face. She brought me to an empty dormitory and told me it would be my new home. When I checked the bank book I'd been handed on the way over, I found a rather excessive amount of pocket money in my account. From the day I began to wear an exceptionally flashy school uniform and commute to Mihama Academy. I haven't been face to face with my father even once. And that's where we'll end this episode. So I am sorry to cut it this long, but I felt like chopping Sakaki's story up would not be well to the story, and it would not be honest to the game, so to say, to the whole part of Yumiko's character. I'd hate to do it with the other characters, and I'd hate to do it with Yumiko. I've tried to so that and that's in general with the editing of this series, to go for a coherent, sort of fluent kind of thing where scenes that fit together go in the same episode together. And usually that fits with around 30 minutes, but obviously I could have cut this somewhere halfway through, but it just wouldn't feel right. And, well, I don't mind making a long episode now and then, and this was definitely one of the longer ones. Probably the longest in the Fruit of Grisaia series so far. Well, until next time, take care.